Hey everyone, this is Ari from Heavyocity, and welcome to the Click Track, a podcast about composing and the tech behind it. I'm here with my distinguished co-host, award-winning composer, Jason Graves. How's it going, Jason?
That was my Click Track impression. Did you like it?
I liked it. It was very Pro Toolsy.
It was. I'm doing great. Thanks, Ari. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. This is going to be a lot of fun. I'm actually looking forward to chatting about today's topic. The idea behind this podcast is we start with a theme, kind of forum thread-ish topic that relates to composing, music production, tech, all the stuff that we kind of geek out about as composers and developers of audio tools.
Woohoo!
So let's get right into it. This is the Click Track. Okay, so our big question for today, Jason, is loops. Are they cheating?
Dun, dun, dun.
Dun, dun, dun. So tell me, Jason, are loops cheating?
I think the short answer is no, because it's all about the artisan and not about the tools they use. That's my short answer, which I'm sure we will unpack.
It's a really good point, right? They could be used as starting points, as inspiration. That's how I like to use them.
Cool.
But then again, if you're using a loop, when is just the loop too naked, and when is it your music versus not?
It's almost like it comes down to the emotional impact you're going for, right? What sort of emotional message are you trying to convey? And I think if you're talking about music on a dance floor or in a club or something like that, and you've got some cool booms, 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 that by nature, the loops are repetitive, and it's going to be repetitive and drive home exactly what you're looking for. But you're not just playing that loop, right? You've got other stuff on top of it that you are creating, melodies and chords, maybe lyrics if there's a vocal, and the loop is underpinning everything else. I think that's probably the most basic version for me, where I think it's okay to do that because the loop is like the backbone, and you don't want it to be repetitive and call attention to itself.
Right. And it's that's a great kind of starting point for music in general. Like I know when I'm writing music, if I'm sitting and staring at a blank session or a blank sheet of paper, I could stare there for hours, right? Kind of looking into the abyss of nothingness.
Yeah, that's something that as soon as you mentioned the word loop and cheating, I thought, well, what was the sort of earliest exposure I had to anything that could kind of be considered a drum loop? And what immediately came to mind was Prince and something like When Doves Cry, like the way he would take one of those Lindrum drum machines and like detune all the samples and program his own thing. And actually for that song, there wasn't even a bass synth or a bass guitar. It was just the drum machine was like carrying kind of the emotional weight of the song. And then he did, of course, amazing vocals and guitars on top of it. But that beat, that kind of with the detuned claps and everything, totally looping, but totally original to him. He could have changed it up, but he didn't, because that's what he wanted the drums to do.
That is the prime example of using a loop to write music.
Really, really great music, yeah. I mean, so inspirational and so unique, right? Like, even though it's got a loop in it, if you heard the first two beats of that, you'd be like, oh, that's When Doves Cry by Prince.
Right,
like,
right,
it's
exactly.
Great.
So that wouldn't be considered cheating, right? It's a loop.
No.
That's what sounded right and sounded good to him as he wrote. Whether or not he, as the composer, wrote that part and then looped it, or if he sampled it from somebody else, like, does that matter?
Yeah, it's emotional inspiration, both for the artist and for the listeners. But I think it's also important to note that it's not, just that drum machine playing for 32 bars in the middle of the song. He's adding stuff on top of it. And I think that's where we really get into are loops cheating ? When you have these completely exposed, just like obvious one finger on the keyboard loops that play like in film or in TV. and it's sort of an eye roll for us folks in the know, right?
If you were to work with a loop, what if you started with a bare minimum loop, what would yours sound like? And then what would you do with it to kind of tweak it and change it or add to it if you didn't even tweak and change the loop at all, but to use it in context where you were okay with using that as a part of your piece?
Well, Ari, it's funny that you ask that because I happen to have a small loop prepared.
This was not pre-planned in the least.
Not at all. Not whatsoever. Now, Ari's known me forever, but for those of you who don't know me, I am a drummer first and foremost. So if you start talking about loops, my mind's automatically going to go to drums, just like it did with the drum machines. There are also melodic and harmonic loops out there as well, but honestly, I approach them all the same way. And usually it's a jumping off point. And the first thing I do with any loop is basically make it so that it's not looping. So I kind of use it the way I would use a sample, where I'm playing a melody with a sample. I'm not playing the same note over and over again. I kind of think of it that way with loops. So I've got something here, I think it's out of DM307, which is one of my favorite drum machines, but it basically just does this. So that's obviously a 4-bar phrase, awesome sound, but it would just repeat after those 4 bars and repeat and repeat and repeat. So one of the first things that I really like to do is sort of stagger the entrance. So instead of holding the key down, we talked about one finger composing, instead of just holding my finger down on that E2, I think it was, for the whole 4 bars, I'll just do little bits. Kind of start it for a beat and then let it rest and then play it again on maybe beat 4. So I'm performing the loop, but I'm performing it by stopping it and restarting it. And just to mask the fact that I'm kind of just hitting start again and again on this loop, a lot of times I'll put a delay on it. So when you lift your finger off the keyboard, the delay actually kind of makes up for that lack of space. So in this example, it's the exact same loop. I'm just sort of playing it more interspersed for the first 2 bars, and then for the second 2 bars, I'm holding it down the whole time, but I'm restarting it. So you're getting basically different rhythms the whole time. So that way, what I like doing is kind of getting a performance out of it. So if this, say, were 8 bars of a buildup of some sort, I would start simple like that and then kind of increase the frequency of the loop starting. And then the delays also build up on top of themselves. That's for a one element loop. And then I would be doing probably some other things, synths or orchestra or sound design around that. So it really does feel like more of a performance and less like something that's repetitive.
That's such a great example of how a loop could be used both as a starting point and something to really fill out space in your track.
Yeah, a lot of times I found, full disclosure, I'm just a huge fan of like all the Heavyocity loops. And if I ever use loops, I'm pretty much going straight to Heavyocity stuff. And one of the first things I usually end up doing is just kind of carving out space, because any loop sounds really amazing, but even if it's just a drum going boom, dot, boom, boom, bop, it's sort of, after a while, the repetition kind of, your brain turns it off and it just becomes a little noise in the background. So I like that idea of carving out space and then allowing time for the tension to build, basically. And hey, Ari, I get the feeling that maybe you have a little bit of experience, like with loops. You've probably done 10, 20,000 loops in your career.
Just a few.
Just a few?
Not too many.
Enlighten me. Like, what's your kind of mental position when you're first starting to think about how you're going to design the end user experience for loops?
It's a really great question. The practice of making these loops, or these pieces over the course of the past decade plus of time that we've been making them here.
Gosh.
You learn quite a bit what works and what doesn't. And one of the things that you touched on earlier was this idea of space. This idea that if you make a loop and there's too much going on, there's not space for the rest of the music. There's not space for creativity to flow or to come out. There's not space for the music itself to just breathe. So really, we here like to split, especially when we're talking about like percussion loops, we'll think of it in terms of 3 different layers. You have a low layer, a mid layer, a high layer. It's almost like your drum kit. You have your low drums, your mid drums, your snares, your toms, and then your high ticky-tacky cymbal kind of stuff. But when you're writing these loops, if you have a 16th note pattern, maybe it's just the hi-hat sound that's doing that 16th note pattern. And then the bottom layer is just doing not even 4 to the floor. It's just a cool pattern going on with a kick or low percussion element. But space is really the key to it. When you're thinking about what makes things big, right? Why does an explosion sound massive when you go see something in the movies? Right? It's not so much the explosion sound, but it's that little gap of space right before it that's super quiet.
Mm-hmm.
And it's all about those little gaps and those little bits that leave open space in the loop to make it a lot more impacting.
I mean, it's ironic, isn't it, how the absence of something is actually what makes it seem big beforehand, all that space. I think as composers, I'm sure you probably agree with me, I am so guilty of overloading, especially when I can get my fingers on some really good loops, like overloading the soundscape with too much stuff. And then I have to go back in about 30 minutes and inevitably start carving it out again.
Well, and you're sitting at a keyboard and you have 10 fingers, so you have to use all 10.
Oh yeah. Otherwise you're not working hard enough, right?
Exactly, right? And absence makes the heart grow fonder. Is that it?
Did you say absinthe?
Yes, absinthe makes the heart grow fonder.
Yes.
Is it the synth or the drink?
Yes. I think both, preferably.
The answer is yes.
It's interesting, the whole thing with loops, because I just had this experience on Wednesday. I went to the Science Museum with my family in Raleigh, and they have this big screen with a really cool movie that plays kind of like it's probably 30 minutes long, so it's just a continuous playback the whole day. And there's not a lot of narration, there's not a lot of voiceover, so it's really just like music and cool sound effects. And the music was pretty good for museum music, but man, they were leaning so heavily on liquid grooves from Stylus RMX, like to the point where it would be like boom, that one loop that like you've heard 1,000 times.
Yeah.
A cue started with that, and it played, I kid you not, it repeated like 8 times, and then like some high string started coming in, and I was like, man, they are wearing that loop out. And even my wife, she looks at me, she goes, they use that in that Sting song. And I was like, right? Because there was an album, I don't remember which one, I can't remember specifically what song, but he used like that exact same RMX loop. And it was fairly exposed at the beginning. There were a couple of other things on there, but that's sort of cheating to me if you're Sting and you're using a loop, like a canned loop right out of the box, especially something as popular as RMX.
Yeah.
That's like a recording artist. I feel like if I were doing an album, I wouldn't want to do that. I want to do my own thing. It's a little different when you're composers and there's deadlines and things, right?
Sure, exactly, yeah. Well, then, just to say it out loud, there is the question of, he's a recording artist. It's a piece of software that the vast majority of his audience may not even be aware of. If it made him feel a certain way and the piece of music came out the way it did as a result, is that okay or is it cheating?
Yeah, I guess it's a shortcut, right?
Yeah.
We all have to take shortcuts, mostly because of deadlines and or producer or director demands. And I would say take the shortcut when you have to, but when you have time, do your own thing.
Right.
Like record some talking drums or something. Get a percussionist in there to play something cool. It's not like he couldn't invite Manu Katché or anybody else over to his castle to record something cool and then chop that up and make that a loop. But I love Sting. I really do. It was just a little. I mean, when my wife was like, "That's from Sting," like. It's like, okay, my wife is not a composer or a musician. She recognized the loop.
Right, exactly, yeah. So I have a funny comparison here for that where, there was a movie that came out, I don't remember how many years ago, but a movie about a pandemic. I'm not going to say what movie it was. But there is a cue in the movie that I heard it and I was like, wow, that's straight out of one of our products, and it is this loop right here, and I'll play it for you. That's pretty much most of the cue. There's a couple of swells and a couple of things going on. But that's pretty much it. And is it cheating? Does it work with the scene? Is it okay to do that? I mean, it is kind of why we make these products, right? Like, we make things for people to use in their music. If the vast majority of the audience doesn't know that that's where it came from, and that's what spurs inspiration for the composer to write, why not? I guess? Question mark?
I have a feeling that is probably something that either a cue got thrown out, or at the very last minute it was like, hey, we need to spot this scene needs some music as well, and the composer was like, my assistant can take care of that,
right?
And then in 30 minutes they were finished,
right?
And it's just like, there's a fine line, right? It's definitely not the most inspirational, but I guess emotionally speaking, in the scene, it probably worked great because it's a great loop.
Right.
It's not. I mean, I know I've done probably a couple of things like that, not that sparse and exposed, but in some breakdowns or something, like in a TV scene for a beat or two or a measure or two, there's probably some Heavyocity loops like just chugging away in the background while like one string note is sustaining with tension, playing like a tremolo really high. It's the real world, and we all have to live with all those deadlines and other people telling us what the music needs to sound like, right?
Right. And, that brings up a good question of, like, percussive versus tonal loops, like we were chatting about before. Does one feel more cheaty than the other? You build percussive beds using, I'll play a quick example of, a damage 2 loop, which is broken apart again into those low, mid, highs. Right, and you get a pretty full loop, but what's cool about writing with that, with percussion loops, is that you can very quickly and easily layer different elements. So, say I didn't like the high part and I wanted to change it to something different, I could very quickly use one of the other breakout menus and just add a couple of other pieces on top to make it different. And then again, doing what you were talking about with DM307 in your example is like you could start and stop elements here and there to really quickly and easily make it your own. But maybe starting with that loop is what inspired you to begin with.
Exactly. And I think the schedule and timeline is always how much you can de-loop something,
right?
Versus just needing to kind of let it roll.
Right.
I know with a lot of TV, like chase stuff, producers don't want to hear things changing up and poking out a lot. If it's a 30-second like high-speed chase and you've got maybe 20 bars of action music there, as soon as you start doing too much in terms of changing like the rhythms and things like that, they're like, just keep it simple, keep it grooving, keep it simple. And that's when you literally are, I say you, I mean me, I'm holding like 3 fingers down. for that thing, and then adding stuff on top of it, of course. But the rhythm, the drive from all the percussion is coming from the loops and the fact that they're looping.
Right.
And who knows? They could literally strip that down to just the loops in the TV, like on the dub stage for the final show.
That's a good point.
And if the producers like it, then great. It's as long as they're happy, I'm happy.
That's actually, I mean, that's a really good point to bring up too, is like, you're writing your piece of music, you have, your percussion bed that could be made up of loops, and then you write some orchestral parts on top of it, or some piano parts or whatever it is, but then it goes to the stage and you have to deliver stems to them to use. Maybe they don't even use the other ones, and then they're just playing back a piece of your music with just the loops playing. Is that cheating? Actually, for those of us that don't necessarily know what stems are, Jason, can you step through just briefly what that actually means for our listener?
Yeah, let's say you had like a 4-piece band, guitar, bass, drums, and keyboard. The stems would be like the song, except you only hear the keyboard playing for the whole song. Mm-hmm. And then another audio track would be you only hear the drums playing. And that way, if it's playing behind, let's say, some crazy chase with like lots of traffic and helicopters and gunshots, maybe the showrunner's like, oh, man, that keyboard is just getting in the way of all the horns, and they turn it down, mm-hmm. or mute it or EQ it. But the stem means they can treat the keyboard however they want to make it work with the audio and like dialogue that's going on screen.
So what you're saying is that you as a composer can start with a loop, make a percussive bed, put in a whole bunch of different pieces on top of it to make it your own piece of music, then deliver it to the dub stage, and they can take all those pieces out, and then you're left with just the loop again.
Yep. Exactly. I mean, because ultimately, like, we're working for someone else, right? I am not Sting. I probably don't need to qualify that, but
don't sell yourself short.
I can be Sting. I have no say, especially with like TV and trailers and things like that. It's all literally out of my hands. They're working on it in some dark dub stage somewhere in Hollywood.
What an interesting industry, right? So I did want to jump in really quickly here and discuss tonal loops and how I like to use them.
Yeah.
I wanted to, go back to one of the tonal loops that was from Evolve. Maybe it is a little bit of cheating because I made the loop, or one of us here made the loop, and whatever. It's how we use them. This is one of the more well-known loops and most widely used loops from that product. It's been around now for a decade, and I hear it everywhere.
It follows you.
Oh my God, so much so that it was literally used in the music that was the background to the announcements at the Delta terminal at JFK.
Oh my gosh.
So every 2 minutes it was playing this loop in the background, and I was like, ugh. Can't escape it. So here's the loop. Here's the loop. Right, clearly a tonal loop. Definitely has a tonal center.
Yeah.
It's in the key of C minor. But if I'm going to write a track and I don't really know where to begin, starting with something like this really helps me out as a composer. And, bring the volume down, open up a piano and play to it and get a chord structure, and suddenly you get something like this. And that's how you get going, right? So is that cheating, or is it just a great kickoff?
First of all, I love the loop, and I love the support you put underneath it, because the loop itself could be like a little cold, a little clinical, right? Mm-hmm. And I think if you were doing your one finger composing and just holding down the one key on that loop and like, hey, my piece of music's finished, then yeah, that's a bit cheesy. But as soon as you put those piano chords underneath it and you start giving it some harmonic support and kind of changing it up, like the mode that you're in and the chords that you're playing, now you're writing music. And you're writing music because you were kind of like jump started with that loop.
Right.
I would be doing the same thing if I had like an interesting synth sound that just was on an ARP of some sort. I'm like, oh wait, that's kind of cool, and then I start harmonizing and messing around with it. So I think it's like I said at the beginning, it's really about the artist and how they interpret these things that we call loops now, and less about the loops themselves.
Right.
Just as a quick example of what I do, especially with percussion loops, but it would be the same with any sort of melodic loop as well. I've got 4 different things here from the same kind of breakout menu on DM307. So these are all available on a single keyboard. But if I had like a hi-hat sound, for example, I mentioned starting and stopping loops and having delays to kind of help cover up when those loops are stopping. Another big thing that I love to do is having that filter there, usually built into the interface and contact. So I've got a low-pass filter, and instead of just with all the hi-hats the whole time, I do something like this. So instead of hearing maybe exactly when that loop is starting or stopping, you're sort of getting, it's almost like a drummer is kind of coming in and out. And a lot of times I'll take 2 hi-hat loops and almost, I always play the filters in real time. So I'm, ebbing and flowing, maybe having it work like one's coming in at the bottom of the measure, another's coming in at the top of the measure, or maybe they're not even coming in at the same time. You get something a little more like this with just hi-hats. And I'm just going to let this play for all 4 bars. So then the idea would be, if you had everything together, it's funny. Does this sound familiar? I have a low element, kind of a mid element, and then these 2 high elements that are kind of sharing space. So this is how I take 4 loops and make them sound and feel non-loopy, and also kind of build from something simple and sparse to something a lot more tense and full over 8 bars.
Cool. That's exactly what you can do with loops. Like that's a prime example of how to use all these different layers to your liking without it sounding too out of the box, I guess, for lack of a better way of saying it. Like this is your piece of music that you wrote using loops, and it works.
Loops are your friend. Use them
Exactly.
well.
Loops are your friend. They're not cheating. They're friends.
Yeah.
Are they friends with benefits, or are they cheating friends?
I think they're friends with benefits. Yeah, definitely. Definitely not cheating.
Well, I'm glad we got that resolved.
I feel much better now.
Much better. I'm going to go right with more loops. Loops are not cheating. Don't be afraid to use them. Just use them as inspiration. Change them up a little bit. Tweak them a little bit. Start and stop them. Put some reverb and filter on them. Be creative with the tools that you have in front of you is really, I think, what we're getting at here.
Yeah, make them your own.
Quality of the loops are everywhere. You can get amazing loops from amazing products, and it's a great place either to have an inspirational starting point or to build some really cool music. So, with that said, thanks for joining us. Hope you enjoyed it. Please rate and subscribe. If you want to hear more about music and the tech behind it, thank you, Jason, for being a part of this awesome venture that we're going on.
I'm so happy to be here.
And make sure to tune in for the next one.